Today on Mina Studio, 3 reasons your church isn't growing. Welcome to Mina Studio. My name is Nathan, and with me as always is my church growth expert, Ronald. He's the Stegosaurus back there on the keys. Today we're going to talk about 3 reasons your church isn't growing. What? Oh, sorry. 3 good reasons your church isn't growing. That's right. If your church isn't growing, it doesn't always mean something is wrong. It could mean something is right. I know for a lot of us church leaders, church growth is like, well, it's an idol. Let's be honest. It's an idol. It's very important, and it's tough on our egos when our church isn't growing or is getting smaller. And sometimes it is an indication that something isn't going right, but that's not always the case. So let's look at 3 good reasons your church might not be growing. Number 1, your preaching isn't people-focused. It is no secret that people, all people, including us, like to hear about ourselves. In fact, we would much prefer to hear about ourselves than about our God. That's just our sinful nature. It's true of everyone. Photographers know this all too well. People usually don't care about your pictures until they are in them. And they've actually done scientific studies of people looking at pictures, and their eyes always go to themselves first and then look at the rest of the picture. I'm not putting people down. It's just our nature to think about ourselves first. And some unscrupulous preachers know this all too well and use it to bring people to their churches. Their sermons are focused on us, on what we can do, on the things we need, on the things we can get from God, on us, to the detriment of learning about God and the gospel. Our sermons should, of course, be God-focused, and then through that we can learn about ourselves. It's one of the reasons that the prosperity gospel is so popular, because what the prosperity gospel does is put the control back in our hands. It's about what we do, about how we think, about the words we say. We have the power in the prosperity gospel. God is just a bank, basically. So your church might not be growing because you're talking about God too much and not enough about us. That's not necessarily a bad thing at all. On the flip side of that, you can go too far and just not talk about people at all. The Bible is about God. Church is about God. Worship is about God. But we learn about ourselves through that, through worship, through God. Christ died on the cross for us. So we are in the gospel. We are in the Bible. We need to know how the gospel and the Bible relate to us. So it doesn't mean we should go all out and just never talk about people at all. But it is possible that your church is not growing because you do talk about God more than you talk about me. Number 2, you're not putting on a good enough show. If you're a smaller church, then most likely the mega church down the street puts on a much better show than you do. It's just the truth. They have more money, they have a bigger pool of talent to pull from, they have a bigger pool of ideas to pull from. They just have more resources to put on a good show. And I'm not trying to talk bad about those churches. There's a lot of fantastic mega churches that really have a heart for the gospel. But sometimes it does mean people will go to that church of yours because they're looking for a show, for a big emotional experience. And it's a good thing that you don't put on the same show that they do because you're not them. You don't have the same resources, the same money, probably not even the same talent. I know it's hard to hear, but some churches do just have less musical talent than others. But that doesn't mean they have less worship potential than other churches. Your church should be your church. Your worship culture should fit your church. And if that's just one person on the stage with an acoustic guitar singing songs, that's fine. You're not going for a show. You're going for worship. So I personally know it is so easy to be jealous of that mega church down the street that puts on such a good show. And especially when they're pulling people away from your church and your church is not growing because of it. But that's okay, because truthfully, you probably don't want your church to grow just because people want to see the show you put on. You want your church to grow because people are changing and getting to know God. Each church, the mega church with the great show and your smaller church, each have their own place in the kingdom, and God is using each for a different purpose. Now, the flip side to this is that's not an excuse to just phone it in, you know? Well, they're going to put on a better show anyway, so it doesn't really matter what we do. That would be the wrong attitude. We want to bring our best in worship. It might not be as good as their best, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be our best. And the third good reason your church might not be growing is it's not supposed to. I think through the whole church growth culture, we've sometimes got this idea in our head that God always wants all churches to grow. And I don't think that's true. I don't think God always wants all churches to get more people in their building. He does always want more people to come to know him and to come to know the gospel. He always wants that. We know that. But that doesn't mean that your congregation will be adding more members or will be getting more people in the worship service. There's a lot of reasons why that might happen. People might be encountering God in your church. You might be getting new people in your church, but you might also have others leaving, going to other churches or moving away, or there's just lots of reasons. We were at a church in the city where a lot of people there were very mobile. They would work in this city for a couple of years and then they would move to another city. Their jobs would take them away. And sometimes the church would get smaller, not because something was wrong, but because that was just the culture of the area we were in. Or maybe your church is right where it needs to be as far as size to serve the people best that are there. Getting bigger isn't always better. And I think that God, now this of course is just my interpretation, this is not gospel. I think sometimes God does keep churches at the same size or even makes them smaller. I don't think that every church is always meant to grow. So one reason your church might not be growing is it's just not supposed to. So these are all just my opinions. I'm not an expert. I don't know your church. These are just things that I've observed and seen. And I know a lot of pastors can get really down when their churches don't grow or even when their churches get smaller. And it may be an indication that something is wrong, but it may also be an indication that something is going very right. And of course, the bonus fourth reason your church might not be growing is global pandemic. But I think we're all fairly aware of that one. I really do hope this video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I will see you back here next week.